Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, June 13th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Ukraine F-16 training could start this summer. So the Netherlands defense minister told Reuters on Monday that training for Ukrainian pilots on F-16 fighter jets could begin as soon as this summer. So the Dutch defense minister said that starting the training this summer is the ambition, and that the coalition of countries working to arm Ukraine with F-16s will see if that's a realistic timeline. So that's what they're shooting for, and it's almost summer, so that means this training could start pretty soon. The Netherlands and Denmark are leading the US backed coalition of countries that will provide Ukraine with F 16 support. President Biden signed off on European countries sending their F 16s to Ukraine last month, but there is still a long way to go before the American aircraft make it to Ukraine. Zelensky said last week that he received a powerful offer on F 16s, but it's still unclear how many Kiev is going to receive. So the Netherlands are still, making a decision on how many they're going to be giving Ukraine. It sounds like I know Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium are all possible countries. They have F-16s and they might be sending them, but again, all this stuff is not finalized. But apparently, Ukraine requested dozens of F-16s from the Netherlands, and they're still making their final decision. And now the estimates of how long the training will take vary pretty widely. But now there's U.S. officials telling the media that it could take as little as 4 months for Ukrainian pilots who are already experienced flying the Soviet-made MiG fighter jets. And this is really part of the NATO's long-term support for Ukraine. As again, it could take a while, it could take a year, more than a year, before Ukraine actually gets these F-16s. And of course, Russia has strongly warned against NATO providing Ukraine with F-16s and other advanced jets. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov noted recently that F-16s can carry nuclear weapons, and he warned that the provision of the aircraft was a major escalation of U.S. and NATO involvement in the war. But we know that as this war goes on, the Biden administration is less and less concerned about escalation. All right, the next one here, lawmakers urge President Biden to send longer range weapons to Ukraine. So a group of 9 bipartisan members of the House is urging President Biden to supply Ukraine with longer range weapons and expedite the delivery of M1 Abrams tanks to the country. So this letter was sent to President Biden. It was led by Representative Jason Crow. He is a Democrat from Colorado. And they called on Biden to send the ATACMS, and those are the missiles that have a range of 190 miles. These lawmakers said that they were encouraged by the UK's decision to supply Ukraine with Storm Shadow missiles that can hit targets up to 155 miles away. So it sounds like they want to outdo the British. They said in this letter, quote, "We urge you to transfer ATACMS to Ukraine from existing U.S. stocks or approve transfers from our allies. These surface-to-surface missiles provide a long-range capability that will significantly improve Ukraine's ability to target Russian troops and equipment in Ukrainian sovereign territory," end quote. So back in March, the Pentagon announced that it was speeding up its deliveries of Abrams tanks to Ukraine by refurbishing older models instead of manufacturing new ones. When the U.S. first announced they were going to be sending the Abrams tanks back in January, they were going to buy 31 brand new tanks and they needed to be manufactured. So it would have taken a few years, but the Pentagon changed the plan. And under this plan, Ukraine is expected to receive the Abrams toward the end of this year. But that is not fast enough for Crow and the other representatives who signed this letter. They called on President Biden to speed up the delivery even more by using whatever authority is necessary. They said, quote, "We strongly urge you to do everything in your power to accelerate this timeline, whether that be through the Defense Production Act expended contracts, or pulling from different stocks to provide Ukrainian troops the tactical equipment needed to mount their counteroffensive, end quote. So we know the counteroffensive is underway, and it sounds like they want Biden somehow to get these Abrams tanks to Ukraine, as soon as possible. Or right now, it sounds like they want him to send them over there. And this group of House representatives also called for the U.S. to ship more air defenses to Ukraine and applauded Biden's decision to allow the delivery of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. And they noted the overwhelming bipartisan support for Ukraine in its fight against Russia, as the majority of Congress still favors pouring more weapons into Ukraine despite the risk of escalation and provoking a direct war with Russia. So the other signatories to the letter include Representatives Tony Gonzalez. He's a Republican from Texas. Mickey Sherrill, she is a Democrat from New Jersey. Marionette Miller Meeks, Republican from Iowa. Jared Golden, Democrat from Maine. Chrissy Houlihan, Democrat from Pennsylvania. Donald Davis, Democrat from North Carolina. Jimmy Panetta, Democrat from California. And James R. Baird, Republican from Indiana. So those are the members of Congress demanding that Biden do more. And that is, only 9 of them signed it. We've seen a lot of people in Congress, criticizing Biden for not doing enough for Ukraine. They don't think he's doing enough, even though they've sent how many billions of dollars worth of weapons into the war zone there. All right, the next one here. Poland wants a response to Russian nukes in Belarus. So Polish President Andrzej Duda said Monday that NATO must respond to Russia deploying nuclear weapons to Belarus. He said, quote, "I absolutely believe that such a situation demands an unequivocal response from NATO," end quote. And he said this while he was in Paris meeting with Macron and Schultz. So Duda did not specify what kind of response he had in mind, but he has previously said that Poland wants to host U.S. nuclear weapons. In October 2022, Duda said that he was discussing the idea with Washington. When Russian President Vladimir Putin announced his plans to deploy nukes to Belarus, he compared the move to NATO's nuclear sharing program, under which Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey host U.S. nuclear weapons. For now, there's no sign that the U.S. is considering deploying nukes further east in Europe. The State Department said last month that the Biden administration saw no reason to adjust their strategic nuclear posture in response to Russia sending nuclear weapons to Belarus. Putin said last week that Russia will send tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus next month once the construction of storage facilities is completed, which is expected to happen by July 8th. I think this is something that Poland might push for, is to host U.S. nuclear weapons. And we know they're building one of those Aegis ashore. I always want to say offshore, but it's Aegis or Aegis ashore missile systems in Poland. There's one in Romania, and those anti-ballistic missile systems are capable of firing Tomahawk missiles, which could be tipped with nuclear weapons. So, it is possible that the U.S. could put nuclear weapons in either Poland and Romania that could be fired from those launchers sometime in the future. And that was one of Russia's big gripes with the U.S. and something Putin wanted resolved. All right, the next one here. NATO kicks off its largest ever air war games. So this is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So I've been covering this, that they were planning to launch these war games, and now they've started. So the North Atlantic Alliance began historic aerial deployments over European skies on Monday. Dubbed Air Defender 23, the German-led war games will include 250 aircraft and 10,000 soldiers. And a pretty big chunk of the forces are American Air National Guard troops, 2,000 of them and 100 planes. So that's quite a bit of American military equipment that's involved in these drills. And I think it really shows how, reliant NATO is on the U.S., that they're having their largest ever air exercises with 250 planes, and 100 of them are American. And they're saying that these drills are a message to Putin, and that's what this is all about, a big show of force. And this is as, this big summit in Vilnius is coming up in July, and NATO is preparing, to draw up war plans for Russia for the first time since the Cold War. So, there's just no sign of these tensions between NATO and Russia easing anytime soon. All right, the next one here, Sweden approves extradition of PKK supporter to Turkey. Sweden on Monday approved the extradition of a man to Turkey who has previously expressed support for the PKK, which is a Kurdish militant group that Turkey, as well as the US and the EU, consider to be a terrorist organization. So Turkey has refused to approve Sweden's NATO bid over the Nordic country's alleged support for the PKK and has been pushing for Stockholm to approve the extradition of suspected associates of the PKK. So this guy that they are extraditing, he's 35 years old. His name has not been released. He's a Turkish citizen who was convicted in Turkey on a drug charge and served over 4 years in prison. He moved to Sweden after he was released and put on parole. And he was arrested last August at Turkey's request, and now his extradition has been approved. So according to a report from AFP, this guy thinks that the reason for his extradition, it's not related to his drug charge, but his links to the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, that's a political party in Turkey, and because he's previously shown support for the PKK. Now, Erdogan, the Turkish president, and other Turkish officials have made clear that they are seeking the extradition of suspected PKK members from Sweden as a condition for approving Stockholm's NATO bid. So I don't think there's any secret here that is why they're extraditing him, is because of his alleged ties to the PKK, or he's admitted to expressing support for them before. So Sweden has also passed a new anti-terror law in an effort to placate Turkey, which criminalizes participation in a terrorist organization. So that law and Turkey's efforts to target Kurds in Sweden have sparked anti-NATO demonstrations. There were some earlier this month in Stockholm. So now that Erdogan has secured a victory in Turkey's recent presidential elections, the U.S. and NATO are stepping up their efforts to get Turkey to let Sweden into NATO. Hungary still needs to approve it, their NATO bid too. The last time when Turkey approved Finland, Turkey and Hungary did it around the same time. But anyway, this is Sweden is very eager to join the alliance. As I went over yesterday, they're allowing the deployment of NATO troops on their territory before they actually join. All right, the next one here, Israeli intel unit to prepare for war with Iran. So Israel's military has created a new intelligence unit to prepare for war with Iran amid simmering tensions between the two nations. So Israel has been conducting a covert war against Iran for some time, but in recent years, Israeli officials have been speaking more openly about the fact that they're preparing for an overt military conflict with the Islamic Republic. Seen a lot of threats from Israeli officials, again, in recent years and recent months. So this is from a report from Ynet, the Israeli media site. They said that the intelligence branch of the Israeli Defense Forces created the new unit to specifically prepare for a fight with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The head of research for the new intelligence unit, known as Branch 54, told Ynet that the preparations for a conflict with Iran are much different than the wars Israel has waged in Lebanon and Gaza. So this officer said, quote, "This is a significant mindset change that the IDF is required to make. It is not similar to a war against Hezbollah or an operation in Gaza against Hamas or Islamic Jihad." End quote. And this officer also said that they are responsible for providing the military with knowledge of infrastructure regarding Iran's military capabilities. So they're scoping out what kind of weapons and systems Iran has inside the country. And Ynet also spoke with an officer who is compiling lists of targets that the IDF could strike inside Iran, showing that this is about really preparing for war. And this officer said, quote, "Every day we gather more targets and objectives at a satisfying pace and learn how to strike them effectively. We have already doubled the target bank in Iran, regardless of nuclear facilities. It is very different from interwar operations. An overt military confrontation will be an entirely different story, end quote. So again, Israel has done a lot of covert attacks inside Iran, blowing up things inside nuclear facilities, assassinating scientists, assassinating IRGC officers, all inside Iran. Very brazen operations, but this is something different that they're talking about here. The question is if Israel really has the capability to do this without the United States. And the news of Israel's preparations for war with Iran come amid reports that the U.S. and Iran have been engaged in new negotiations related to Iran's civilian nuclear program. Although both sides have dismissed the idea that an agreement is close, I think even if they were working on something, they wouldn't really be discussing it publicly, the U.S. and Iranian governments, that is. So in light of these reports, Netanyahu told Secretary of State Antony Blinken that no deal between the U.S. and Iran would prevent Israel from attacking the Islamic Republic. So more threats from Netanyahu as they seem to be seriously preparing for war. All right, the next one here. This is from Connor Freeman at the Libertarian Institute. Israel to announce plan for thousands of new settlement units in the West Bank. So Israel has informed the White House that it intends to announce the planning and building of thousands of new settlement units in the occupied West Bank later this month. And this is according to a report from Axios. One of the sources told the outlet at minimum the plan includes 4,000 new housing units being built in existing West Bank settlements. The Joe Biden administration is ostensibly opposed to these moves as the settlements are seen as undermining prospects for a two-state solution in Palestine. However, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition includes extremist settlers dead set on substantial colonial expansion, eyeing annexation of the West Bank, and this has not diminished U.S. support. So that is a good point. The Biden administration will put out statements condemning settlement expansion, which is de facto, kind of slow as they are expanding settlements in the West Bank. It does amount to slow de facto annexation. And this governing coalition said in a statement, after they were elected, that they pledged to keep expanding settlements and to eventually annex the West Bank. That's what they want to do. There's no secret. And a lot of them in the coalition are actually settlers, so this is what they're all about. And you have the Biden administration say they're opposed to it, but they're never, they're still providing them with $3.8 billion in military aid each year. There's not even a hint of ever, reducing that or leveraging aid, to get concessions from Israel or anything like that. So they could say they oppose it as much as they want, but it's not going to change anything, and they're not actually changing U.S. support for Israel. So we'll probably see that announcement soon. All right, the next one here. Iran confirms that it held indirect talks with the U.S. So the Iranian Foreign Ministry on Monday said that Iranian officials held indirect talks with the U.S. in Oman last month, but they dismissed the idea that an interim nuclear deal was on the table. So this is Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Nasser Kanani. He appeared to confirm a report from Axios that said the talks took place in Oman on May 8th, when President Biden's top Middle East official on the National Security Council, Brett McGurk, was in Oman. And I did cover that, his trip was not made public, but there was a report that he went and that he was discussing outreach to Iran while he was there. Now there's this Axios report saying that there was actual negotiations going on. They didn't meet directly. The Omani officials acted as mediators, but still, this is the first really known talks like this between the two sides since last year. Sources told Axios that the main message that the U.S. conveyed to Iran was basically a threat, telling them that there would be severe consequences if Iran enriched uranium at 90%, which is required to develop a nuclear bomb. But at this point, there's no indication that Iran is planning to take that step. So there was also this Middle East Eye report that said the U.S. and Iran have been holding direct talks, not indirect, inside the United States, but those negotiations have not been confirmed. Both the U.S. and Iran denied that report. which also said that an interim nuclear deal was close. It was basically the idea would be for Iran to reduce uranium enrichment in exchange for some sanctions relief. But again, that hasn't been confirmed. But there's definitely some sort of dialogue going on between the two sides. And Kanani, the Iranian foreign ministry spokesman, he said that Iran is not interested in an interim deal. They don't want anything temporary. What they want is to restore the original 2015 agreement, known as the JCPOA, which the Trump administration withdrew from in 2018. But there's no sign that the Biden administration wants to do that. President Biden has previously said that that deal was dead. So it's tough to know exactly what's going on between the US and Iran right now, but I think this shows that there is some dialogue on this nuclear issue, at least. And I wonder if the Saudis are involved in this at all, since they've normalized with Iran. If they're involved in any sort of mediation between the two sides, that could be possible now. You might find out more about that in the future. All right, the next one here. China denies Cuba spying allegations. So the Chinese Foreign Ministry on Monday denied allegations that China was spying on the U.S. from Cuba and criticized the conflicting information coming from the U.S. government and media outlets. So this whole story started last week when the Wall Street Journal reported that Beijing and Havana reached an agreement in principle on establishing a Chinese spy facility in Cuba. The Pentagon and the White House quickly dismissed the report, calling it not accurate. But then later, an unnamed Biden administration official told several media outlets that China had been spying on the U.S. from Cuba since at least 2019. So, still saying that report was accurate, but, saying that some sort of spying activity has been going on in Cuba. So in response, this is Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin. He said, quote, "Over the past few days, we have seen self-conflicting comments from U.S. officials and media on the so-called allegation of China building spy facilities in Cuba. What is true can never be false, and what is false can never be true. No matter how the U.S. tries with slanders and smears, it will not succeed in driving a wedge between two true friends, China and Cuba, nor can it cover up its deplorable track record of indiscriminate mass spying around the world," end quote. So a denial with some criticism of the U.S. there. So the allegations about a Chinese spying facility in Cuba caused a frenzy among China hawks. And just frothing out the mouth. These people are just completely hysterical and insane when they talk about anything related to China. And they're all saying, oh, Blinken, because Anthony Blinken, according to media reports, U.S. officials speaking to the media, they're saying that he's going to China soon. U.S. officials have said that he's going to travel to China on June 18th. However, Wang did not confirm the plans. When he was asked about this, he said he had nothing to share. So it's not confirmed that Blinken is going. But anyway, you had these China hawks running around, yelling that Blinken has to cancel this trip because of this Wall Street Journal report. It all seemed very coordinated to me. So China hawks in Congress, they're demanding that the Biden administration takes action over this. They want more sanctions. And there's been a lot of quotes, that I could have put in here, but I put in again the one from Bob Menendez, who's the top Democrat. He's the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He said that if China establishes a spy facility in Cuba, it would be a direct assault upon the United States. And then, of course, if, NATO tries to bring Ukraine into the alliance, that's not a big deal. Russia shouldn't worry about that. But, and then at the end of this article, I just make the point that if it's true that China is looking to gather intelligence on the U.S. from Cuba, it would be a response to the U.S. running surveillance operations near China. And of course, the examples are the U.S. flying surveillance flights over the South China Sea. The U.S. is suspected of having signals intelligence capabilities in Taiwan. And another thing that I mentioned that I think has gone overlooked by a lot of people is that the U.S. helps India spy on Chinese troops near the disputed border in the Himalayas. In 2020, the U.S. and India signed a military deal so the U.S. can provide India with satellite intelligence and other sorts of intelligence to keep an eye on these Chinese troops. And when a skirmish broke out between the two sides, I believe it was in 2021. So there was the big one in 2020, and 20 Indian troops were killed, and about 4 Chinese troops were killed. There's been a few other skirmishes since then, and during one of them, at least according to a report from U.S. News, the U.S. intelligence was used by India to see the Chinese troops coming, so they were prepared for them. So, I mean, you know, that's a military confrontation that the U.S. is providing the other side with surveillance on Chinese troops. So, you see all the things that the U.S. is doing to China. It can't really talk when it comes to spying and surveillance. All right, the last one here is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. The U.S. is planning to overhaul the UN Security Council. So the U.S. apparently wants to add new permanent members to the UN Security Council and is developing plans to expand that number. So Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, she is spearheading the effort to enlarge the body by adding 6 new members. So the Security Council is the organization's most powerful body. Currently, the U.S., the British, France, China, and Russia are the 5 permanent members of the council. And there's also 10 rotating members. In September, President Biden said the body should be expanded to include more countries from Latin America and Africa. I guess he's talking about permanent members. So under this proposal, there will be 6 new permanent members. It's not clear which countries will be added. They've previously advocated for Germany, Japan, and India to receive spots on the Security Council. But apparently these new members will not have the veto power held by the core 5 members, which is kind of the reason why the UN Security Council doesn't actually get anything done, because, you have China, the US, Russia, and they all have veto power. So it's rare that they agree on things. And it's, the UN doesn't really have much power in general. It's all kind of symbolic anyway. But it looks like, I wonder if this is kind of some way that they're trying to change it so they can kind of go after Russia more, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it depends on who the permanent members are. So anyway, that is it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints, one from Ted Galen Carpenter, The Big Lie That Won't Die, Trump as Putin's Puppet, one from George Beebe and Susan Loftus over at Responsible Statecraft, Testing Russia's Red Lines Could Become a Fatal Experiment, one from Norman Solomon, The U.S. Should Not Provide Cluster Munitions for Ukraine. That's over at The Hill. One from Dan McKnight at the Libertarian Institute, Biden's Nazi Allies in Ukraine. And our spotlight is by Peter Van Buren over at the American Conservative, A War Like No Other. But that's everything for me for today. You could always support us at antiwar.com/donate. Share the show around, share the website, tell people about antiwar.com. All that is a big help. But I'll be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.